All righty. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone out there. Hope everyone's having a fruitious week. I know folks are still recovering from Explore Las Vegas, and it sounds to me like for those of you who did go to Explore and have tickets for Explore and can sign into your Explore portal, the videos for Explore are available for you lot. So you can actually log in and view videos from the event. For everybody else, a little bird told me that those videos are going to be up through the same portal. If you go to the Explore webpage, you can watch the recordings that were done at Explore after October 5th. So starting on October 5th, the rest of those videos will be available for streaming and download, and you can watch those on demand. Obviously not as awesome as being there in person, but we understand that folks sometimes have difficulties getting out to Explore, and this was a good one. And it sounds like next year is going to be even more epic. We're already planning. So however, we're still going. We have Explore on Tour going on in 2025. Coming right around the corner, we've got Mumbai and London, and then we're going to be running out 4 more locations over the course of the rest of the year. These are selling out really, really fast. We had originally planned on having these being 1 or 2 day events, going around the C tabs and the P tabs in most locations. The popularity of the certification courses was absolutely insane. So we're going to be repeating that in most of the geolocations. So you can actually, with your pass, go and take certification courses, which is amazing, like for free. That's just unheard of. And in fact, we've got a couple of our general Explore superstars today. And in fact, I know a lot of our speakers today have been doing Explore for almost as long as I have, which is saying something. So howdy, folks. How's everybody doing today?
Great,
Hey,
thanks.
Good,
good.
good. I'm going to go ahead and stop my share here, and we can get rocking and rolling. Alina, what do you have lined up for us today?
Okay. Um, Hi, everyone. My name is Alina Thailander. I am a product marketing engineer at Broadcom. Today, I am joined by my co-presenters, Vincent and Justin. But we also have Scott and John with us who will assist during the Q&A. This session today, let me start with this because it's good background. It's a part of a series that started about 2 weeks ago, featuring Rick and Pete, and they presented on modernizing your infrastructure, apps, security with VMware Cloud Foundation. And if you've been following us, last week, my colleagues Sejong and Sachin continued the series, and they discussed about modernizing infrastructure with VCF. Today, we are focusing on application modernization, and we're very excited to have you here with us as we explore, how you can leverage the cutting edge technologies to transform your application landscape and drive all this innovation within your organization. Moving forward, let me walk you through our agenda today. We're kicking things off by discussing the challenges we're facing with app modernization. Next, we're diving into the strategic IT initiatives featuring VCF. After that, I'll share a little bit more about the use cases, and also I'll share a few real-world customer stories that are highlighting the impact of these efforts. And then we're going to look on, how we can enable the service infrastructure and cloud services for our app teams. And then we're going to explore also the building and managing Kubernetes and other modern apps, including private AI applications. So each one of these use cases will feature a demo as well. So let's get started. App modernization, I call it, it's a journey that can affect all of us, and no matter what is our role in the organization, because even if you're part of, the app team or the IT operations, or if you're an exec, everybody shares this equal part of excitement, but also pressure, because you want to keep up with the rapidly evolving tech landscape. So, for the developers and data scientists out there, we know it can be frustrating dealing with slow infrastructure processes that, are taking you away from what you love the most, which is coding and creating. Meanwhile, we have the platform engineers and you out there are just juggling, the challenges of automation and security on one side, and then also trying to make sense of complex systems while, also trying to keep everything running smoothly. And then last but not least, we have our executive team members, and we know that your insights about modernization risks and innovation barriers are incredibly valuable. And we also see that, these outdated systems can hinder creativity, can also give you issues with transitioning technology that raises essential privacy and security questions. So, with that being said, together today, let's dive into these challenges with open minds. And, we're hoping that by sharing our experiences and strategies, we can ease this modernization journey and empower everyone to thrive. So like I mentioned earlier, 2 weeks ago, my colleagues have introduced these strategic IT initiatives, and I wanted to provide a quick refresher in case some of you did not attend the session. We aim to help you drive business value through 3 key areas. The first one is infrastructure modernization, the second one is application modernization, and the third one is security modernization. The idea behind infra modernization is that you can build a private cloud on your premises for flexible, scalable operations, and you can extend those capabilities to the edge and the public clouds. For app modernization, and the topic of our session today, we are helping to deliver self-service infrastructure to your app teams, and we're also helping them to manage modern apps, including private AI solutions. And the third one, security modernization, aims at highlighting the importance of strengthening compliance and security, and ensuring a quick recovery from cyber threats. So today we're double-clicking into the second strategic initiative, but before we go in there, I wanted to just point out an important thing. What does app modernization really mean? So I'm going to try to kind of break it down in some simple terms. And when it comes to app modernization, I've been thinking about this easy to understand examples that I've been using when I'm talking to people. So when it comes to app modernization, think about giving your old car a makeover to make it run like a new high-tech vehicle. It's the best example I can think of, because app modernization is all about upgrading the way your applications work so your teams can get things done faster and more efficiently. But before we look at the use cases, I also wanted to point out why this topic matters. Like, why do you care about it? Why should you care about it? Modernizing applications is crucial because the tech landscape is always changing. This is the reality. Users expect faster, smoother experiences, and then businesses need to keep up, right? And by giving teams the right tools and processes, companies can innovate quickly, deliver high quality products, and very important, they can stay competitive in a fast-paced market. Plus, also important, the rise of AI, with the rise of AI, making sure companies are ready for this wave can really set them ahead of the curve. So overall, it's all about making life easier for developers while enhancing the overall quality of products that are offered to users. And with that being said, the first use case is about self-service access and automation. So another example, imagine that you're able to just jump in your garage and pick up the best tools that you have without having to wait around. Because this use case is about the way developers can quickly access everything they need, stuff like infrastructure or cloud services. And they can do that without having to go through long approval processes. So this use case is about speeding things up and helping them innovate without roadblocks. If you're wondering about a customer example, École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne is a research institute in Switzerland, and they're aiming to provide their researchers with fast and secure IT infrastructure. Their main challenge was that the researchers were using external public cloud solutions, And by doing that, they were risking sensitive data and they're, violating the strict data protection laws. So to address this, EPFL implemented VMware Cloud Foundation, and they're focusing a lot on the VCF automation component. And they were able to create a private cloud with self-service portal. And by doing this, they allow their researchers to quickly provision virtual machines in just about 15 minutes. So when they started implementing this new solution, it turns out that it increased adoption within the research community, growing from 2,000 to nearly 4,000 VMs in 2 years. And that was offering a faster, cheaper, more secure alternative while continuing to foster innovation, which is very important. Okay, with that, I will hand it over to Vincent.
I'm going to kind of break this up into two chunks. One is going to be setting up the environment so those developers and application teams can come in and actually start to consume this private cloud. So we'll go through some of that first from what we call the organization administrator perspective, which is going to be going in and setting up, policies, projects, and so forth for our environment and for our app teams. And then after that, what I'll do is I'm going to jump into really just the consumption options of the underlying, objects that we can deploy, like VMs and VKS, Kubernetes clusters and so forth. So first things first here, I want to just kind of throw this up just to give you a little bit of context before I jump into my first demo, which is basically going to kind of cover a little bit of essentially some of the services and the things that we're focused on with VCF automation as we kind of go forward. Obviously still at the bottom here, vSphere, VCF underlying, components are bubbled up into our automation tools. And then we have things like, this modern cloud interface as well. So I'm going to go into things like a catalog that folks can go in and deploy from, or what we call self-service IaaS or a services UI, as well as CLI. And there's obviously API and some GitOps stuff that we'll talk about as well, and so forth. So there's really kind of this choice of consumption, as well as some things like, the foundational stuff that we need in order to get there, such as VCF services, which I'll talk quite a bit about, which are a number of like out-of-the-box services, standard services, some packages, and some other services that we can kind of implement in there. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. In fact, I have a couple slides here later on that. And then content management being a big one that's kind of new now, and kind of talked about and explore a little bit. And that's where we can distribute content to these different organizations and different groups, lines of businesses. So content such as, images and stuff like that they can use for deployments. So what I'm going to be focusing on here in this first part of the demo is really sort of this org admin person. So let me just kind of go through this as well instead of just kind of jumping through every feature. At the top here, we have the developers. We really have those applications teams, and those are going to be the consumers that are going to come in and say, okay, I need a Kubernetes cluster, or I need a VM, or I need a database, right, or I need a network object, a load balancer. So they can go in and deploy those things. The organization admin, which is going to be the first demo I'm going to do, is essentially the administrator of that organization that the developers and application teams are working within, and that individual is going to set up the RBAC and the projects and stuff like that for that organization. Because if you look at one of the blue boxes here, there's tenancy and project management. So we're introducing this real tenant methodology, this multi-tenant capability to manage multiple organizations and so forth. Then the enterprise IT admin is actually responsible for doing that, to creating the organizations, managing them from a provider standpoint, and so forth. So those are just some of the things that we're kind of, we're doing generally with the product in terms of it being new. So let me just do this real quick. Yep, and there we go. And I'll resume. Okay. Okay, so let me log in real quick into the organization. Now, this organization is called Acme Sales. This is a organization that essentially VCF9. I'm going to log in as the admin, okay, and then I'm going to log into Acme Sales as the actual admin itself. So when we log in as the organization admin, what we're going to have the ability to do really is go in and start to build out the things that individuals will use, like for instance some of the blueprints and stuff like that. So here we're going to go ahead first and create a content library. So remember in the slide I had that content section, and this is kind of what this is part of. Now, there's a couple of different ways we can do content libraries or share content. One, the provider can have a library that can share content across multiple organizations, but each organization can also have their own content library where the users from within that organization can use the images and stuff they're uploaded to deploy stuff. So we are also allowed to subscribe to an external library. And then we can give the URL for that external library, hit next, and then we'll also choose a region. Now, I haven't really talked about a region yet for the sake of time, but that's essentially an abstraction across infrastructure like your clusters or your zones within vSphere, and it gives us a way to abstract it out. So you can treat a number of vCenters or a number of zones and supervisors as a region and sort of isolate things that way. We'll pick our storage class for the content library, and then we'll just confirm that. And then once that content library is created, we can go ahead and then see the images that are available to us now from that external library that we connected to. Now, the other thing that we're going to want to do here when we go in as an organization administrator initially is create a project. So a project is a way or a boundary for users and what we call namespaces in this organization to be able to deploy into. So users will go into this project, they'll see things that are tied to this project like catalog items, blueprints, potentially if they have a permissions like where admins, and other things, right? So the projects will also be a way for us to say, okay, these users can then now go in and create various objects within there. Let me go ahead and just skip over here. I'm just going to go ahead and go right to the projects section, I think, just for the sake of time. Yeah, let me do that. Okay. So here in the project, I'm going to click new, and then essentially I'm going to create a project here, and we'll get hit next. Then we're going to add some users, right? So when we add the users, I'm going to initially add Connie. Connie will be a project administrator. And then what that means is Connie will be able to actually manage the whole project. And then we're going to add some other users like a project user and a project advanced user. So right now I'm logged in as an organization admin. That's a higher level sort of user role that can manage the entire org. But these are actually users of the project that will be able to go in and do stuff like with the catalogs and stuff like that and the services that we're going to actually make available. So first, let's go ahead and create a namespace. This namespace is going to be a target for our deployment. So we can say, okay, this development namespace now exists, or we can create it and then deploy VMs to it and some other things in there that we might want to deploy. When we create a namespace as that target, what we want to do is give it a name, a namespace class, which I kind of skipped over in the demo a little bit, but that's essentially where we are going to have sort of a templatized way of things that we can deploy within the namespace, so VM classes and stuff like that. And then also a region, which I talked a little bit about, as well as a VPC. So one thing that we've done here and the product has really elevated that VPC for the organization. This is where we can have private and public subnets exposed to the users as they deploy things. So we'll see a little bit of that as we go along here and do the demo. Okay, so that was one namespace. We can also have multiple namespaces here as well. So if I wanted to have like a production namespace, I can do that. So that way we can have two namespaces that developers and application teams can use, and then they can easily go back and forth between the two and see objects that are created between these two namespaces pretty easily within the UI itself. Okay, so now we can see that the development namespace is available. And then once we go into that namespace here, we can see that these are the services available. Now, earlier I mentioned that there were some some services that we had available and so forth. And these are just some of them that are a little bit more out of the box, like the virtual machine service, the Kubernetes service, and so forth. And as well as like a network service where we could do like load balancer type of stuff and those type of things. Okay? And I think from an organization admin perspective, that was kind of really the main thing that I wanted to show. That was kind of just sort of setting up the project and then getting in there and being able to add those users and stuff like that. So once that's set up now, the user should be able to log in and start to consume this underlying private cloud here. So what I'm going to do is we'll jump to the next section here. And let me just make sure I got the right, yeah, here, let me make sure I'm on the right slide there. There we go, okay.
Thank you, yes,
Yep.
I forgot about that. This is the second use case that we have, and that's looking at the single platform for containers and VMs. And the best example that I have in this case is like having a universal remote that you can control all your gadgets, your TV, your surround system, your gaming console, everything without having to juggle multiple remotes. So for this use case, it means that everything, apps running in containers or virtual machines can be managed from one place, making life easier for tech teams and allowing them to focus and also building better products. And next slide. We have an example, a customer example. Chitale Dairy is an Indian dairy company with about 85 years of experience. And the major challenges that they faced were during the COVID-19 pandemic, which basically disrupted supply chains and required rapid operational changes. Their goal was to digitize every part of the dairy value chain from farm to consumer, right? So they turned to VCF and VMware Kubernetes Services, VKS, for scalable and automated solutions. And this shift provided them with the agility to meet market demands. It allowed them for high transaction handling and also ensured minimal downtime. So as a result of implementing our solution, Chitale Dairy was improving the quality of their products while also, to say, enhancing, right, the livelihoods of thousands of farmers in the region where they operate. Okay, Vincent, now back to you again.
Thanks, Lena. Yeah, so next portion I want to talk a little about are some of the services that we can start to consume. So as a consumer now, what can I go in and actually start to do? So what I'm going to do is I'm actually in the demo going to log in as an advanced user and show you around that a little bit, or what that user can do. But before I do that, I want to go through just a slide or two on just saying some context on these services that you're about to see me deploy or manage here a little bit. So one is some of these runtimes, right? So we have these modern runtime where we can deploy objects like virtual machines and Kubernetes clusters using custom resource definitions right from our tools and containers, CVs for pods, things like that. And all those are kind of custom definitions that we can use. So when you look at like the Kubernetes manifests that are going to get created or that we have created for our objects inside of that side of the tool, you'll see your standard Kubernetes manifest. There are some other infrastructure services as well, like for storage. For things like persistent volumes, network services for like load balancers and other private public subnets that I talked about earlier with the VPC, as well as load balancer services like layer 4 services out of the box. And so we can attach things right to VMs and stuff like a load balancer to a VM as it gets deployed and reuse these load balancers and persistent volumes over and over again if we want to. And then there's some additional cloud services. A couple of these we'll talk about and see in the demo. One would be like, some of these are just things that we've validated or get installed or the customer can opt to install, such as data services, which we'll look at a little bit in the demo if we have time, which is like our data services manager, which allows us to deploy open source databases and lifecycle manage them and have policy driven database as a service, as well as Argo CD for more of a GitOps approach to deploying all these kind of objects like Kubernetes clusters and VMs and stuff using more of a GitOps continuous delivery pipeline, and Harbor for image registry as well, since we are working with Kubernetes and things like that. So what I'll do here is let me just go ahead and I'll jump into the demo. So just to wanted to give you a couple of ideas about what these services kind of entail. All right, so let me log in as Mary. So I'm going to log in as Mary, and Mary is an advanced user. And so what you'll notice is a little bit of a difference. This is a live environment here. So what you're going to notice is a little bit of a difference. Mary doesn't see everything up here that we saw before, right? The organization admin will see more stuff. What Mary's really going to see is the services that I just talked about. Some of the services like the virtual machine service, that Kubernetes service, that database service I just talked about are available for Mary right here from the services UI, available in the various namespaces that we created, as well as a catalog as well of where Mary can go in and consume some of these items. So let's look at this from a sort of a consumption standpoint, right? One thing that Mary can do is go in and say, you know what, I've got the set of services over here on the left-hand side, and I just need, let's say a cluster. So let's, for instance, look at, like, let's say the associate to create a Kubernetes cluster first. Let's just do that. And then I'll show you a little bit of what we can do post creation. So in order to go in and just create let me go in and we do our dev namespace here. Yeah, we'll go ahead and create a cluster here. And then let me do custom configuration. This one might be a little bit better on the dev. Okay, there we go. So notice as when I'm creating these objects, this cluster, and when I create the VM and everything like that, we're going to see the Kubernetes code, the manifest get built out on the right-hand side. So, we don't necessarily have to be experts in this in order to do it. We just can go ahead and go through the UI. So I'm just going to give this a name. We'll just call this, my K8 test. And then we also can pick our API class. There are built-in class. We can also pick the version of Kubernetes that we want. So this is also another nice feature about our Kubernetes service, is that we can actually do the updates and have new Kubernetes releases available asynchronously. So even out of band, we can do it. You don't have to upgrade everything. We can do that sort of individually. We can also manage like cert rotation within there, as well as setting up, like general things you would want to do, obviously in a Kubernetes cluster, right? Set up your maybe a pod sider or a services sider where pod traffic maybe on this particular sider where your services will be on that sider, et cetera. And then of course the other main thing that we want to be able to do is really build out the infrastructure for the cluster, right? So how much compute and how much backend resources do we need for this cluster, such as the control plane, right? So we have the option to do between 1 and 3, choose the size of the VMs that are going to get deployed when the control plane is deployed. And so, it's just those kind of options that we would normally expect, right? And so if we need that beefier cluster, we can do that through adding additional control planes, as well as our nodes, right? So we can do that as well. We can add node pools with worker nodes in there, and then specify the VM class as well as the replicas and so forth. So if we wanted to add a node pool, right, we can do that. And then now we have this, capability to go in and hit next and then review and then actually deploy a cluster, right? So if I go ahead and just finish, it will go ahead and start the deployment of that cluster for me. Let's go ahead and go into one that's already done here. The one thing that we could do, or one that's already been deployed, we could see just some information on it. We can go in and edit we could scale up the control plane. We can edit the node pool, VM class and size and stuff like that. Also, one thing that you'll notice is that we do have the deployment code on the right-hand side, which is available when you hit the View YAML button, and then that can be edited as well. You can also download the kubeconfig file from here for authentication. The other thing that we have available as well when you deploy your clusters is the ability to get monitoring data from those clusters. So we can look at, actually, let me go to this one over here. Sorry, what happened there? Yeah, I'll go to this guy. So we do have the ability to look at metrics that came in from a cluster, so at the cluster level itself, or even down into the namespace or the application itself. So we can look at the app itself, go in and look at some of the storage controllers and so forth. So like CSI, right, might be your storage controller. There's Prometheus for monitoring as well. So we see some of the packages and some of the things like Antria and all that for networking, core DNS, and some of these other things. So that's a really interesting or nice capability there for our customers in terms of being able to monitor that. Now, let's also say I want a virtual machine. Now, this is also another option here. I can deploy virtual machines right from here, from what we call the services UI, right into the proper namespace, right? So if I'm an application team or developer and I have access to multiple namespaces, I can easily switch between them and start managing these objects, which, when you manage Kubernetes, that's actually a pretty nice feature. So when we go into deploy a virtual machine, we can, what we're basically going to do is, let me try this step one. This seems to be working a little bit better for me. Let's go into VM. Okay. Now I'll create the VM here, and we'll go ahead and go into deploy VM. So what I'm going to do is just going to give it a name, and then basically what we'll do. Okay, you know what? Maybe what I'll do is I'll just go through it, and then I'll show you when it's already deployed. We'll go ahead and click Zone 1. And that's going to be our zone. Now, remember earlier I talked a little bit about the zones in the SEC. So that is essentially a cluster that's been turned into a zone that we can then put into a region or a supervisor and then a region, and then start to do those abstractions a little bit. And here's those images from the content library that we have available to us, as well as the VM class. So the VM class will be like kind of the size of the VM, as well as maybe some other capabilities that we've introduced into the VM class, such as like hardware acceleration type stuff and so forth. Okay, so let's go for the sake of time. I'm just going to show you one that's already been deployed, because that's just kind of a VM that got deployed there. And we'll go into just one that is deployed, and I'll just show you around a little bit. We can power it on, power it off. We can look at some network settings, as well as view the YAML, open the remote console, etc. Okay, so now that we've kind of done, like, let's say a VM and a VKS cluster, what if I want something else, like let's say a database, right? Now what I can do is I can go in here into the database service and hit create. And what this allows me to do is essentially go in and pick, like, let's say a database version. This is going to deploy like an open source Postgres database. We can see some of the options over here as I build this out. So if I come in here and I say, I want database version 16, and I'll just call this my, my DB test. And then we can deploy, like, let's say a single instance of this particular database, give it a password and username, and then go, continue on with the form. And the one thing that I can do here is also pick like an infrastructure policy that I might be interested in. Our data services manager capabilities are infrastructure policy driven. So inside of the appliance, or inside of vCenter, the VI admin will go in and create infrastructure policies like what compute, what networking, HA, there's some various things we can do here. And then we can also pick our VM classes and our disk size and so forth. And then we can also enable backups from here. So I can enable a maintenance window, enable my backups, which we have disabled by policy, and then also any HBA configuration options for the pg_hba.conf file, and so forth. So we can deploy databases and so forth as well as other services like, let's say, load balancers and stuff like that, right? So if I need a load balancer that I want to reuse over and over again, I can create those. And so now I've got these services that I've been creating. Folks can come in and either consume them, or they can go in and deploy their own as well. Now, here's the other thing too I wanted to bring up. So we talked a little about how the organization admin can go in and set all this up, and then Mary or advanced user can just go in and start deploying from the services section. But there's also a catalog option as well. So for users that maybe are or maybe not advanced users, earlier I kind of went through a little quickly, but there were a few different users in the project. One was just a regular project user, and one was the advanced user. A user or an advanced user will see the catalog. So the catalog is kind of project-based, right? You can share items between projects, but you can assign them only to a single project, so only those users will see the catalog item. But for instance, like here's that database that we had, we were able to deploy it from here. But if we would rather, deploy these databases using the catalog, well, that's another option, right? So I can go in here and hit request. Maybe this individual, who's using the catalog might need more help in order to fill the form out. We can have the help, bullets over here, as well as conditional drop downs in a very customized form to help individuals and walk them through the right options and so forth, right? So we can deploy a database this way, as well as from the services UI. So the catalog and the services UI both being capabilities that these users will have to do this outside of the CLI being another very robust way to do things with the VCF CLI. When they do deploy things from the catalog, they'll see those deployments here. So we can see that there was an application deployed, as well as like a database or an Argo CD production instance. In fact, this is interesting too, because with Argo CD, I mentioned that a little bit earlier in the presentation, but essentially that was a way to do sort of this GitOps, right? Continuous delivery, and there's method, this basically deploys Argo CD infrastructure and production instances and so forth. So some of those integrations you can see here as we're developing and sort of bringing in a lot of these services to help create that rich application team experience. And so that's essentially sort of the consumer demo I wanted to sort of pass across as well here. So what I'll do is, I think, Justin, I'm passing it over to you, I believe.
Okay, now we are on the third use case, and this is highlighting the AI-ready infrastructure. And as you've gotten used to my examples. This is like setting up a great kitchen for cooking. You have all the right tools, you have all the great space that you need, and now you can prepare delicious meals, as quickly as you can. So for this example, in the tech world, just having a solid infrastructure for AI means that companies can deploy sophisticated AI applications very quickly, and that is keeping things efficient while still adhering to necessary rules and regulations. For the next slide, we have another customer example, and it's the last one. We have the United States Senate Federal Credit Union. That's a mouthful. And they serve members of the US Senate and related groups, focusing on their financial wellness. The main challenge that they have was to improve infrastructure scalability and security while making operations easier. Because it allowed a significant number of employees to utilize AI solutions, which ultimately was improving the overall experience for their members. Okay, Justin, you can take it away.
Thanks, Alina. Great introduction. And in this section, we'll be using a lot of the ideas that Vincent explained to you, the Kubernetes, the databases, the VM classes. But here I thought I'd start with the end in mind, which is what is our goal with AI in general and private AI at VMware? And the goal really is to combine internal private data that is private to your company and apply a large language model to that data so that users can interact with their data in a very natural language way. We all know ChatGPT or Claude or those other public cloud AI systems. We've all used them. This is really bringing that in-house, that same functionality, a private ChatGPT in-house that you can talk about your own private data to this and get good answers. An example might be a customer service representative wanting to ask questions about a new product that they're not familiar with yet, but they're having a conversation with a customer about it, and they ask a chatbot for more information on VCF9, for example. That's one style of use of this private AI. So very much the concepts that Vincent talked to you about, Kubernetes, VM classes, databases, they're all under the covers of what I'm going to show you. But I'm going to raise the level a little bit to be somewhat equivalent to a public cloud way of developing one of these AI applications. And that is the people using the private AI services from VMware would, first of all, need somewhere to put those models on premises. And that's a model store. That's a safe place for models. Then they need to bring the model to life. They do that in the model runtime, and there's an API for that. Bring the model to life means effectively executing the model. And people are going to be choosing models from Meta, for example, from Mistral, which is a French company that makes their models available for public use, from Hugging Face, which is the repository of models for the universe, basically. People are going to be choosing models there that are in the data science world and then placing them into the model store, which is really Harbor that Vincent showed you under the covers, as a safe place. And I'll show you the life cycle of that in a second. A key thing in private AI is what private data am I going to make available to that model for interrogation? And to do that, I need to convert my private PDF documents, my Word documents, my reports. I need to convert that into a special format, which is called an indexed format, data indexing. It's really for retrieval, to speed up the retrieval of the data. And that's called data indexing. That makes use of a database, just like the one that Vincent provisioned for you a few minutes ago. And it makes use of special tooling on top of that database called vectors. But we won't delve into that here. The payoff at the end of this whole process is building the beginnings of an AI application in a very simple way. That's what Agent Builder does. It builds you a foundation for your AI application. And we'll see that in a demo here in a few seconds. Before we do, though, I wanted to show you you the life cycle that things go through in a brief way. So as I mentioned, data scientists are going to be pulling models all the time from the public domain, from Hugging Face, which is a dedicated place for thousands and thousands of models that are available. From NVIDIA, for example, from their NVIDIA GPU cloud, from Meta, also known as Facebook. They made this concept very popular by releasing their Llama models for public use, licensed for public use, and from Mistral, another company. Many, many sources of models here. Data scientists are going to choose maybe a new version of the model, and they're going to pull the model down, and where is it going to go to? We suggest that a great place to put the model for experimental purposes, for testing and validation purposes, is a deep learning VM, DLVM. That's a particular kind of VM that happens to have GPUs associated with it. And we provision that VM in exactly the way that Vincent showed you a few minutes ago. So that particular VM has various CLIs inside it, one for pulling models from NVIDIA GPU Cloud, NGC, or from Hugging Face, HF. And once the model is pulled there, we bring it to life and test the heck out of it. We want to make sure there are no vulnerabilities in that model. We want to make sure that the model does not hallucinate, which means making things up in answer to your question. We want to make sure the model is not biased against any particular group, and make sure the model is giving you accurate answers in reasonable time, effectively QAing the model before we allow anybody to use it in an application. When we're satisfied that we've QA'd the application, we push the model up into what we call the model store. It's really Harbor. You saw that in Vincent's presentation. Harbor is classically used to store containers in it, authorized containers. Now we're using it also to store models. Models are just very, very large files full of data. And we're storing those in Harbor so that later on, when an application developer says, I want to use that latest Mistral model, they can pull the model down, bring it to life in the runtime, and then apply data that's been indexed to that model so that the model can make sensible answers to a question about private data. And we'll see all that in a second. So I'm going to demo the right-hand side principally here in this next few minutes to you. I'm going to demo the bringing to life of a model from Harbor, and then the use of the data indexing service inside Private AI to take some private data, load it into a vector database, just a regular Postgres database with a particular data type called vector in it, and then use those two things, use the model and the data indexed from the database to create the beginnings of an application. We call that Agent Builder. So let me go and demo that to you now very quickly. Okay, so I mentioned the Harbor repository, and here it is. And it's made up of projects. I've gone into a particular project here called Models, and you see all the models that we're using internally for our own work here. I'm going to draw your attention to Mistral 7B. The 7B means 7 billion parameters, by the way, and that's a pretty small model. 405 billion parameters is a large model. And this is version 0.2, you'll notice here, and this was uploaded today. So I'm going to pull that model down from Harbor, where it is statically held as a bunch of files, and bring it into the model runtime to actually run it, because a data scientist has asked me to do that. So let me do that next. So here is our model runtime. And model runtime is a service within Private AI Foundation, which is seen from the automation tool that you saw Vincent show just now. And these are the models that I can deploy here. So you've seen models deployed already. Here I'm deploying a brand new model endpoint, which is effectively borrowing that Mistral 7B that I pointed out to you and bringing it down as a model URL there. That's the pointer to the Harbor. And because this model is not open to everybody, I have to use a secret to get it. And so the description there gives a brief description of it. And I'm going to give it a friendly name, which I'll use later on to invoke this model. And this is going to be a model type completions. A completions model is a particular model that completes the answer to a customer's question when they're using a chatbot. And you can see here, I'm using the runtime engine VLLM there, which is very, very popular among people using that. I could also deploy an embeddings model. That's a different kind of model that's used for the vector data in the vector database. So the difference between those two is shown here. I won't dwell on that. Completions model versus embeddings models, probably something that a data scientist would want to use. So, okay, we go ahead, and the key decision we make is what VM class would I use? You can see here, I could deploy this model without GPUs. These are the standard VM classes that you saw in Vincent's presentation. But I want to accelerate this model with a GPU, and so I'm choosing a VM class here, which I know is GPU enabled. I can see that on the far right-hand side, you see vGPU profile in this table. That's the type of GPU A100 and the amount of memory on that GPU, 80 gigabytes, that I happen to be using for this model. So there's my summary, and I say deploy, and there's a whole bunch of YAML behind the scenes. Effectively, my model is now deployed and available through an API gateway that I can use to access it. And I could replace an older version with a new version quite simply by giving them the same routing name there. So the next step now is data indexing and retrieval. We have our model running. We're going to deal with some private data now, and we're going to use some data sources. We're going to bring those data sources together into a knowledge base and index those, meaning load them into a vector database in a particular style. So these are the types of data that I can use here. I'm going to crawl through those directories, fetch some documents, break those documents up into pieces, and then embed those documents into the vector database on the right-hand side. That's the data indexing process in a nutshell. So here I'm going to choose a data source, and that data source, I'm going to give it a simple name, HR data here. And as you can see, I could use a Google Drive folder, a Confluence page, Amazon S3 compatible store, or SharePoint directories as my data sources here. And if I were to choose a SharePoint, I could give it particular directories within that. And you could see now I'm creating a knowledge base from those data sources, and I can update that knowledge database on a manual, daily, or weekly basis. That's very important because private data is changing every day, and you need to be able to bring your data up to date without retraining your model. So this gives me a huge advantage that I'm not dealing with the model every day. I'm simply updating the data in the database. And this is the schedule at the bottom here whereby I would do that. So let me create the simplest possible data source from local files. I'll give it the name of the files here and start the upload. And there's the indexing process having been done on the top right-hand side. What that means is all of the PDF documents in the bottom document list have been processed by a model that happens to be an embedding model. And those documents have been loaded into the vector database ready to go, ready for use in an application. So I have a running model. I have a database with private data in it. I'm going to bring those two together now and use them in an agent. So what's happening under the covers here is a user query is coming in. Number one. Number two is that data is being looked up in the vector database. The results are returned and being sent to the completions model on the bottom right, which generates the text response and feeds me the response that I see here. And Harbor is behind the scenes of all of that. So here's the agent part of private AI now. This is, as I mentioned, all running on top of the deep learning VMs and the Kubernetes clusters that Vincent talked about. And so let me create an agent here really quickly. It's going to be an agent that forms the basis for a chatbot that answers customers' questions. You can see the model endpoint is exactly the model Mistral Instructo 2, which is a quite famous model. And I'm giving it instructions here in the instructions box to say, respond to me in a professional way. Don't make anything up. Use the data in the vector database as your source of truth, effectively. And the way I tell it about the vector database is to refer to the knowledge base that you saw me create and ask it to retrieve records or chunks from it, 500 of them, and make them as similar to the question that the customer is asking as possible. And under the covers, there's a bunch of OpenAI compatible APIs here that I could use in my end user application if I wanted to. So OpenAI APIs are the dominant force in the market here. All that's generated for you, so you can build it into your application later on. And we've written a blog about how to do that. So there's the agent. It's ready to go. On the bottom right-hand side there, I ask it a question, and hopefully it gives me a nice answer. But what I would do further to this now is use techniques like Open Web UI to build an application based on this, and you can get this blog from us to tell you how to do that. So let me go back now to the original deck and hand back to Alina.
Thank you, Justin. The last slide that we have for you today, it's a call to action. As you modernize your cloud infrastructure, we have some key steps to help you accelerate your journey. First, we recommend you to use our cloud maturity and optimization tool to help assess your current setup and identify improvement areas. Next, please consider our VCF professional services for any expert help in optimizing your technology quickly. And the third one, don't forget about equipping yourself and your team with skills through VCF e-library and VMware certifications. So, of course, you can explore additional resources like the program guide and the partner portal. And if you're, ready to maximize your private cloud potential, reach out to us because, we're here to support you every step of the way. And we're also excited to help you succeed on this journey. With that being said, thank you so much for joining us. And we're handing it off to Anders.
Awesome. Thanks, folks. Appreciate you coming in today. And I know we're going to be keeping going with these webinars all the way up to the end of the year. And then next year, we're going to start all over again. So hopefully we will have you guys back in the near future. Always a pleasure when you make it. For everyone who participated today, we'll have the recording for this session up on our webpage. And that page also keeps archive of all of our previous sessions, just in case you missed any. You can catch up. You can also share recordings with colleagues, anybody who was unable to make it today. And it also has a list of all of our upcoming sessions. So be sure to check that out. And be sure to check back with us during our next session, which is coming up shortly. I think week after next or next week. I'd have to double check off the top of my head, but we always appreciate you having here, and we'll catch up with you later.